Before Britney Spears, before Judy Garland, before Marilyn Monroe became the gold standard of Hollywood ruin, there was Frances Farmer. A face like carved marble, a brain sharper than the industry could handle, and a mouth that refused to stay shut. Frances Farmer wasn't your typical 1930s starlet. She didn't beg for fame, flirt for roles, or play by studio rules. She read Nietzsche, flirted with communism, and told reporters that Hollywood was a cheap carnival run by pimps and liars. At the height of her fame, she didn't melt under the spotlight. She spit at it. She could have been one of the greats. She had the talent, the looks, the spark. But what she didn't have, what Hollywood required, was obedience. Instead, she waged a one-woman war against the studio system. And when the system fought back, it destroyed her. Not with scandal or blacklisting, but with something darker, something colder. Her own mother signed the papers, the court stamped its approval, and Frances Farmer vanished behind the locked doors of a mental institution, where rumors still whisper that she was lobotomized. The truth? It's more disturbing than the myth. This is the story of a woman who refused to be silent and was punished for it. It's a story about ego, defiance, talent, betrayal, and the high price of being difficult in a town that eats difficult women alive. This is Frances Farmer, and Hollywood did not want you to remember her. Frances Farmer didn't want to be famous. Not really. She wanted to be heard, which in 1930s America was an even bigger crime for a woman. She was born in Seattle in 1913, the daughter of a stiflingly strict mother and a passive father. Her childhood was spent under a roof ruled by propriety and appearances, conditions that tend to breed either submission or rebellion. Frances chose rebellion. Early, often, and with teeth. At just 17, she won a National Writing Prize for an essay titled "God Dies." The title alone caused scandal. In it, she questioned the value of blind faith, exposed religious hypocrisy, and dared to believe that human intellect might one day surpass the divine. It was raw, blistering, and terrifyingly mature. The essay was published nationwide, and the backlash was immediate. Teachers called her disturbed. Religious leaders accused her of heresy. Her classmates whispered that she must be unwell. But Frances? She stood tall in the center of the storm. She wasn't crazy. She was curious. And for a woman in 1931, that was dangerous enough. That rebellious streak only deepened when she attended the University of Washington. She studied literature and philosophy, devoured the works of Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, and became increasingly obsessed with the role of truth in art. She wasn't looking for attention. She was looking for authenticity. And when she won a scholarship to study drama in the Soviet Union, she took it, despite the whispers that she was a budding communist. She wasn't. Not exactly. But she was searching for something more meaningful than what America seemed to offer, especially to women. In Moscow, she studied under avant-garde theater legends. She learned how art could be political, how stagecraft could be rebellion, and how performance could be a form of resistance. She returned to the States with a fire in her gut and steel in her spine, and almost immediately, Hollywood came calling. To understand what came next, you have to understand 1930s Hollywood. This was the studio era when actors were owned, literally, by the studios who signed them. You were told what to wear, who to date, how to speak, even how to smile. If the studio wanted you to be a blonde bombshell, you bleached your hair or you were shown the door. It was a factory, and the product was fantasy. Frances Farmer did not fit the mold. She was gorgeous, yes, cheekbones like switchblades, eyes like frost. But she didn't flirt. She didn't play dumb. And she made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't here to be some man's arm candy. She told reporters she didn't believe in marriage. She gave interviews where she insulted the role she was being offered. She once said that Hollywood made her feel like a whore, not because acting was degrading, but because the industry used her body to sell mediocrity, with no interest in her mind. And here's where her downfall began. It wasn't just that she hated the system. It's that she made it clear she thought she was better than it. She didn't just criticize the scripts. She sneered at them. She didn't just reject the system. She insulted the women who played along. Other actresses, Many of them, just as talented, just as trapped, saw her commentary as a slap in the face. She might not have meant it that way, but Frances had a way of speaking that scorched everything in its path. She could have played it smarter. She should have played it smarter. She could have smiled through the press junkets, quietly negotiated for better parts, climbed her way to power, and then made her stand. But patience was not her strength. Pride was. And pride in Hollywood is a blade that always turns inward. Still, for a moment she soared. Her early roles in Come and Get It, The Toast of New York, and Rhythm on the Range were box office successes. Critics compared her to Garbo. She was intense, magnetic, intelligent, and clearly miserable. She walked off sets, fought with directors, refused public appearances. The studio grew tired of her bad attitude, and instead of nurturing her talent, they punished her. The roles got worse. The dialogue got dumber. She was being groomed not for greatness, but for compliance. And then she did something unthinkable. She left. She broke her contract and joined the Group Theater in New York, a collective known for its leftist politics, cerebral productions, and refusal to kowtow to capitalism. Frances finally got what she wanted. Real art. But art doesn't pay like the movies, and as the novelty wore off, she found herself broke, disillusioned, and drifting. She returned to Hollywood, tired, poorer, and now carrying the stink of defector. And Hollywood, being what it is, did not forgive. They gave her B pictures, bad scripts, long hours, and Frances, being Frances, didn't keep her resentment quiet. She drank more. Her temper grew sharper. The rumors started. She was a communist. She was crazy. She was a drunk. She was difficult. All of it. True in pieces, exaggerated in others. But none of it mattered. The machine had made up its mind, and it was about to chew her up. By the early 1940s, Frances Farmer was on the edge, and everyone could see it. Hollywood had turned its back. The press was sharpening its knives, and Frances, always volatile, had run out of exits. Her return to the movies after her theater stint in New York was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it felt like a slow, grinding humiliation. The roles were insulting. Thankless supporting characters in forgettable B-movies, turned out by a system that once promised her stardom but now offered her scraps. When she pushed back, when she dared to demand better, they branded her with the most poisonous label a woman in Hollywood could receive. Difficult. And Frances was difficult, but she was also right. She had every reason to be furious. The system promised her artistry and handed her junk. Her ambition was twisted into arrogance, her intellect into instability, and her refusal to play nice became the noose that slowly tightened around her neck. Meanwhile, her personal life was crumbling behind the scenes. Back in 1936, under pressure to appear respectable, Frances married actor Leif Erikson. They looked like the perfect pair. Two young stars with photogenic smiles, clinking champagne glasses at the Brown Derby. But it was a sham. Frances never believed in marriage. She called it a trap, and it was one she walked into with her eyes open. The union was cold, distant, and unsalvageable. They separated repeatedly, finally divorcing in 1942. It was yet another compromise that gave her nothing in return. As the years went on, her frustration turned inward. She drank, heavily. Not with glamour, but with pain. Her once professional demeanor cracked under the weight of bitterness and betrayal. She started missing call times, snapped at directors, fought with producers. Her rage was volcanic, and it was aimed at everything. The studios, the scripts, the phoniness of the Hollywood machine. And then came the implosion. In 1942, she was arrested for driving with her headlights off and resisting arrest. That incident spiraled into probation violations, bench warrants, and increasingly erratic behavior. But the defining moment came in January 1943 when she appeared in court, furious, defiant, and humiliated. She shouted about civil rights violations. She demanded a lawyer. She raged at the judge. Then, in front of the courtroom, she hurled an inkwell at him. That was it. The judge sentenced her to 180 days in jail on the spot. As officers approached, Frances resisted violently, reportedly knocking down a policeman, bruising another officer, and a female jail matron. When she was dragged out of the courtroom screaming, she yelled, "Have you ever had a broken heart?" And just like that, the public's morbid fascination reached a fever pitch. The press ran with it. Frances Farmer in drunken rage. Starlet goes berserk. Frances thrown in jail. Her mugshot was splashed across front pages like a war trophy. Her life turned into tabloid fodder. What no one seemed to care about was that this was a woman unraveling in real time, breaking under the weight of a system that had used her up and cast her out. Then came a glimmer of intervention, but not necessarily salvation. Frances's sister-in-law, a deputy sheriff in Los Angeles County, quietly arranged for her to be transferred from jail to the psychiatric ward at Los Angeles General Hospital. There, doctors gave her a chilling diagnosis: manic depressive psychosis, what we now call bipolar disorder. It was the beginning of the end. But the final betrayal didn't come from the press or the studios. It came from home. Her mother, Lillian Farmer, had long been a domineering force in Frances's life, a woman obsessed with control and appearances. She saw Frances's downfall not as a tragedy, but an embarrassment. And in 1943, she took matters into her own hands. Without a medical tribunal, without any real psychiatric evaluation, with just a mother's word and a judge's signature, Frances was declared mentally unfit and institutionalized. That's how it happened. Not through justice, not through compassion, but through paperwork. Frances Farmer, once heralded as the next Garbo, was locked in a psychiatric hospital like a criminal. Her crime? Drinking, shouting, fighting, refusing to obey. The press called it justice. Hollywood quietly wiped her name from every contract and press kit. And Lillian, now her daughter's legal guardian, signed off on treatments that today would be considered torture. Frances wasn't sent to a celebrity clinic or a spa-style rehab. She was committed to Western State Hospital in Washington, an overcrowded, brutal asylum where patients were stripped, beaten, and broken. She underwent electroconvulsive therapy, isolation, ice baths, possibly even rape, though the records are murky and Frances rarely spoke of it directly. There were persistent, haunting rumors that she was lobotomized. She denied it later, but something had changed. When she emerged years later, the fire in her eyes had dimmed. That furious, brilliant, sharp-tongued girl, the one who wrote God Dies, the one who fought the studios with bare hands, was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, slower, still beautiful, still haunted. Frances Farmer hadn't just had a breakdown. She had been broken. And no one, least of all the world that watched her fall, seemed to care. When Frances Farmer was finally released from Western State Hospital in 1950, after nearly 7 years of institutionalization, she wasn't met with cheers or sympathy. She was met with silence. Hollywood had long since moved on. The industry she once scorned had buried her like a scandal, and the public, if they remembered her at all, did so in whispers. Isn't that the one who went mad? Didn't she end up in an asylum? Wasn't she lobotomized? She hadn't been lobotomized, though she looked like someone who had survived something worse. She was gaunt, hollow-eyed, not aged but drained. The ferocity that once blazed through her interviews, her performances, her rebellions, it had dimmed into a flickering pilot light. She'd survived something the public could never fathom, and something she herself rarely spoke of directly: systemic abuse, psychological torture, and sexual assault, all done in the name of treatment. Though never documented in hospital records, because of course it wouldn't be, Frances later described in chilling detail what happened to her behind locked doors. Stripped of clothes and dignity, left naked in solitary confinement, beaten with wet towels, drugged into catatonia, and raped, not once, not by one man, but over and over again by the same orderlies who fed her, dragged her through corridors, called her a whore, and told her she was no longer a person, just another mouth for the state to manage. And where was her mother? Still holding the legal reins, still telling the world Frances was sick and needed control, still keeping her shackled, even when the abuse became too horrific to ignore. Because by now, it wasn't just about love or protection. It was about ownership. When Frances was finally discharged, it wasn't because she was healed. It was because she was broken enough. Tamed, quiet, useful again. That's when Hollywood made its move. not to welcome her back, but to exploit her downfall. She was booked on This Is Your Life, a popular TV show where public figures were surprised with appearances from people in their past. Frances didn't know she was the subject until she was on camera, lights blazing and an audience clapping. They paraded her old school teachers, doctors, even former friends across the stage, each one feeding the sanitized version of her collapse. She'd been troubled, a little wild, but thank goodness for the loving institutions that saved her. Frances sat there, smiling tightly, looking lost, trying to play along. She wasn't dumb. She knew she was being used, but she also knew this was the price of re-entry. If she wanted a life again, any life, she had to perform. Not as an actress, but as a redeemed woman. A cautionary tale wrapped in pearls and humility. The industry would forgive her, but only if she confessed, repented, and played the part of the good, quiet girl who got too loud and paid for it. And so she did, for a little while. She landed a local TV talk show in Indianapolis, Frances Farmer Presents, where she introduced classic movies and interviewed guests. It was a modest hit, and it gave her the smallest taste of normalcy. But the woman on that show wasn't Frances Farmer the firebrand. She was Frances Farmer the survivor, coiffed, calm, and careful not to say too much. She tried to write a memoir. She tried to act again. But the world no longer knew what to do with a woman like her. A woman who had suffered publicly, spoken bitter truths, and refused to disappear quietly. In 1970, she died of esophageal cancer. She was 56. No red carpet, no tribute, just an obituary, a sigh of relief from the ghosts of an industry that had failed her, and a legacy twisted by myth. Frances Farmer didn't die in a straitjacket. She didn't die in an asylum. She died in Indianapolis, alone in a small apartment from esophageal cancer in 1970. But let's not kid ourselves. Hollywood killed her long before that. Frances had everything a starlet needed to thrive: beauty, brains, boldness. But she lacked the one quality that mattered most to the studio system of the 1930s and 40s: obedience. She refused to be agreeable. She didn't play nice. And for a woman, that was a death sentence. She questioned authority. She scoffed at mediocre scripts. She rolled her eyes at puff interviews. She wanted to act in serious roles, write, travel, do theater that mattered. She once said, "Hollywood is a madhouse. It's a factory of lies." That wasn't the attitude of someone interested in climbing the studio ladder. That was the attitude of someone standing on a ledge, daring it to crumble beneath her. And crumble it did. But her mistake wasn't just rebellion. It was not playing the game smarter. Frances underestimated just how brutal the system could be. She insulted the very industry that signed her checks, treated those below her as fools, and saw herself as too whole for the job she was doing. In trying to reject phoniness, she alienated the people she needed to survive. Because the truth is, not all art is Shakespeare. That doesn't make it worthless. It doesn't make the people who work in it less passionate. Frances looked down on her fellow actresses, on costume designers, on producers who pushed popcorn pictures. But those people were trying to survive, just like her. Some loved the work, some hated it. But all of them knew, you don't bite the hand that feeds you unless you have another feast lined up. Frances didn't. And once the studio system decided she was difficult, the labels stuck like tar. She could have tempered her fire. She could have played nice on the outside and fought like hell behind closed doors, like Bette Davis did, like Katharine Hepburn. But she chose scorched earth. And the earth scorched her back. After her institutionalization, she tried. She really did. She gave interviews. She played the redemption game. She got that small TV hosting job. But the public no longer knew who she was. Or worse, they thought they did. That crazy actress who had a breakdown. And Frances, fiercely proud, couldn't bring herself to play the role of survivor with a smile. She kept her pain just beneath the surface. People say she was distant, hard to know, even cold. But wouldn't you be, after years of being gaslit, manhandled, and silenced? There's a reason her story keeps resurfacing. Not just because she was talented or troubled, but because she embodies something terrifying. What happens to women who refuse to behave? In a different time, Frances might have been a star of indie cinema, a playwright, a professor, a Pulitzer winner. But in her time, there were only two lanes for women: smile and be pretty or be punished. She chose neither, and the system made her pay. She once said, "I have no use for the past and rarely think about it, but we should think about it." About her, about how many more Frances Farmers the world has silenced simply for being too bold, too smart, too real. Because in the end, Frances didn't want stardom. She wanted freedom. And that, more than madness, more than rage, more than alcohol or men or breakdowns, is what scared them the most. Frances Farmer's name should have faded into the yellowed pages of Hollywood history. Another beauty broken by the machine, another cautionary tale buried beneath scandal and shame. But she didn't disappear. In 1982, Jessica Lange portrayed her in the biopic Frances, a film that dragged the horror of her life into the daylight. It was raw, unsettling, and a little too close for comfort. The movie earned critical acclaim and ignited a new fascination with the woman who had become a myth. It brought her story to a generation who'd never seen her films, but saw something of themselves in her fury. It also reignited debate. Was she misunderstood or unstable, abused, or defiant to a fault? Then, in 1993, Kurt Cobain, Seattle's other famous flameout, immortalized her again with Nirvana's song, "Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle." The lyrics didn't sugarcoat a thing. She'll come back as fire to burn all the liars and leave a blanket of ash on the ground. It was a war cry, a resurrection anthem. Cobain, who felt hounded and hollowed out by fame himself, saw in Frances a kindred spirit, a person consumed and spat out by an industry that demands compliance at the cost of identity. Frances never got to burn it all down. But her ghost has haunted Hollywood ever since. Her name is now whispered in reverence by rebels, misfits, and truth-tellers, especially women, who know exactly what it means to be called too much, too loud, too smart, too angry, too difficult. She's the cautionary tale they don't want you to look too closely at. Because the deeper you dig, the more her story starts to look like a warning not about madness, but about what happens when you won't surrender. They said she was insane. They said she was violent. They said she was a disgrace. But maybe what she really was right. And in the end, the joke's on them. Because Frances Farmer will never be just another forgotten starlet. Her story is a mirror, a scar, a battle cry echoing through every actress told to smile more, every woman who's ever been called unstable for refusing to bow. She may have died alone, but she left a legacy that won't shut up. Because Frances Farmer didn't go quietly. She never did.